It's now 7 o'clock, so I call this meeting of the Silver Falls School District Board of Directors to order, and noting that all of us are present. Phil is with us virtually. Phil, are you able to hear us? We will, there we go. Hey Phil, are you able to hear us?
I am now, yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so first on the list is the agenda review. I actually am going to make a motion tonight about the agenda. I move that we add a financial review planning discussion to the end of the agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we add a financial review planning discussion to the end of the agenda. Any discussion? All right, let's vote.
Josh?
Yeah.
Derek?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Phil?
Yes.
Owen?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
All in favor?
All right, and then the rest of the agenda, just as published, let's pretend that that was part of the original motion, because I don't want to vote again. All right, so let's go to number 3, discussion items. We're going to first look at the results of the ThoughtExchange Community Engagement Survey, and our interim superintendent, Dr. Joe Morlock, is going to lead us through that. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Chair Traeger. Members of the board, I'm going to bring up, we have a presentation. I think you have smaller copies of that, and I think they're also posted in board book, and then we will do some additional things, talk about what we found out. Let's see if they come up. There we go. Okay, so as you know, we launched this survey last week. It's really more than a survey. It does what's called the nominal group technique, which takes lots and lots of information and begins to whittle it down. It allows folks to not only put in their thoughts, but then go back and rate those thoughts. And they call it starring, so it's between 1 and 5 stars. So tonight I'm going to go just quickly over some of the information that was in there. Then we're going to look at summaries by theme, and then a summary by participant type. Okay? So first of all, it was actually, we had 1,485 participants. That's a lot of engagement. That's good news. We had 1,433 thoughts, so almost everybody who at least engaged put in a thought, if you look at it in that average. About 107,000 ratings, meaning that about 107,000 times things were looked at, somebody decided to say yes, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. Okay? And then the last one that says the alignment was low. And the alignment means, did you have consensus on lots of issues? You did not. You had all kinds of things on all sides. And I think that's important to realize that the things that people have come up with, there are no great answers. There are answers we're going to have to select, or things we're going to have to do, but you didn't have lots and lots of agreement on things. You had one side that would agree on and another side that would agree on the other side. Okay? So that's what that low alignment means. In terms of the people who took it, the largest group were the parent, guardian, caregivers. These are self-selected. Yes, they do equal more than 100% because you could select more than one box. I want to make sure that you knew that. So you could be both a parent and a staff member. And so we had staff, you can see in there, about 21% identified as that. Parent and guardian, 44%. Community members at 23%. We had some other at 5.1%, and sometimes other was other along with they were a former staff member or whatever, so they were able to put that information in. We also had 6.6 of the were students, so we did have some student engagement as well. Under the categories, here are the things that kind of got the most thoughts that were put into it, right? So everything from academics through teacher retention and class size, so you can kind of see the scope of how the ideas were categorized. These are the ones that, of course, the ones that came up the most during the week-long survey. In terms of keywords, which are really hard to see, so I'll read them down the side from top to bottom, starting at the orange. It's quality education, staff, class sizes, classroom, district, education, writing, support, CTE programs, math, miscellaneous, arts, music, important, mental health, sports, music, block schedule, and K-8. So you can kind of see that there's not a huge differential. Those keywords came up across. Again, you had more than 1,000 thoughts in there, 1,400 thoughts. So these are some of the keywords that came up. Okay, so now we're going to go through some of the themes, and these are the themes that came up the most. That this product, the ThoughtExchange, takes all of those things that come up, and then it's gathered together to kind of tell you where the main areas are, the main themes. So one of them is that many responses emphasize the importance of maintaining strong academic programs, including core subjects like math, science, reading, and writing. And so that actually came up as one of the top ones. It rated in at 4.2. So you had, of course, stars all over the board. You can see on the right. Folks were very specific around trying to keep as many of those academic programs as possible. You'll see that later on when I've divided out in the next document that we'll look at together. I do have it by participant type, so you'll see it by parents, caregivers, you'll see it by staff, by students, by other, so you'll see that in a moment. But this is just overall across the whole survey. The next one, the responses included many suggesting cuts to administrative roles and expenses. Common theme was the need for financial transparency and accountability, with several respondents calling for audits or resignation of board members. This one came up as one of the themes, and they kind of mixed those together. But of course, reducing administrative costs was a popular item. The responses also indicate a strong emphasis for preserving a diverse range of programs. They highlighted the importance of maintaining extracurriculars, sports, esports, arts programs, citing the role in fostering community resilience and providing opportunities for scholarships. Also, you heard a lot about music programs at all levels, with respondents talking about or noting their academic and community building benefits. Okay, so people want a wide range of things. They want core academics, and they also want to have extracurriculars. They want the things that they like. Again, the alignment was low, and so, and we'll chuckle a little bit about it, but it's important to realize that people do like what they have, and they do enjoy the things that we provide them, right? And the toughest choices will be how do we prioritize some over others until we can bring back the others in the future. Okay, so you'll see some of this where it'll be this side and that side. CTE also came up as a primary thought, so a lot of preference for the career and technical educations, health occupations, agriculture, trades. You know, it wasn't that long ago that many school districts had reduced their CTE down to 0 or just a little bit more than 0. Fortunately, I think we've come back from that. So this, as you can see in the reflection in the survey, is something that's important for, that we provide something for all kids to find interest and value in at school. So CTE came in at a pretty strong place. Also, special education, again, two things about that. Number one, we do want to provide what students need so each kid can thrive, and two, some of it's required by law, so we have to follow the law. So there are some things that we do provide because that's what we're required to provide. So it'll be other things that came up along with that: mental and behavioral health support, response noting the critical role the services play in keeping the students engaged academically, coming to school, feeling like they belong. Okay. And then strong consensus on the importance of retaining high-quality teachers and support staff. When you have good staff, you want to keep them. That's a true statement. Respondents emphasize the need for small class sizes to ensure individual attention. Of course, we know that small class sizes require more staff, so we're going to have to figure out how to get down the middle of that. But of course, people did specifically talk about making sure that they had class sizes that their teachers could teach. Okay. Any questions on those themes before I go into the responses by respondent type? Okay. Any great surprises? All right. So the next document is the text document you have. sure everybody can read that. How's that, a little better? All right. So this one I did divide by the types that people, again, self-selected, and these are summaries by that type. So we got some feedback that people were worried that, well, people who don't work in the schools won't know, or people who do work in the schools are the problem, or we didn't ask the students. So we made sure that we did actually ask those people, so I wanted to separate these by group. You'll see some common themes among them. Okay, so they're not going to be huge differentials, but this is how the folks who self-identified in one or more of those categories, this is the summary of their thoughts. For staff, primary things they were interested in, of course, staff retention. We want to keep the folks that we have, our colleagues, the people that are supporting the kids in the classroom, and that we should consider anything that is a non-staff reduction first. For class size, of course, they want to keep the class sizes smaller, manageable, making sure that teachers and support staff can work with the students as best they can. Special education or special programs, as well as CTE, that came up from the staff. They believe that those provide essential skills and support for students, especially for those who may not be going on to higher education. Administrative efficiency, participants in this category did suggest that cuts should start from the top, from district office, all the way through eliminating any unnecessary positions. School infrastructure, talked a little bit about the cost efficiency of maintaining certain school properties. They believe that some properties could be sold or used more efficiently to save costs. So those areas to look at that also came up, things that were suggestions about early retirement, incentives, the feasibility and potential impact of closing certain schools and redistributing students, and the possibility of selling or repurposing certain school properties for additional revenue. Okay? That was from staff. To the next one, under parent, guardian, and caregivers. And I should have said at the outset, these were selected from 3.5 stars and above, so beyond the neutral. Neutral would have been at 3, so you were 1 to 5, and so at 3.5 and above. So for parent, guardians, and caregivers, they said also they wanted to prioritize teachers and classroom sizes, similar to what our staff said. They do also focused on the importance of core and diverse academic programs, so both the core programs, the basics, some people call them, as well as the diverse activities and classes that kids get to take throughout the time in school. Well-rounded education, engaging kids, getting to school. Reducing administrative costs, so there's a common perception among not just this group but multiple that we need to look at cutting where have the least direct impact on the student experience at the school. Student-centric approach, prioritize students' needs in their future, high-quality education, support service, extracurriculars. And then financial efficiencies, so looking for anything that we can do, whether it's on a subscription or a curriculum or what those items might be that are non-people, okay, non-staff. Areas to investigate, specific administrative positions or costs that participants believe should be reduced, perceived financial inefficiencies in curriculum subscriptions, as I talked about before, and the balance between maintaining both core academic programs as well as CT, arts, and sports in the face of these reductions, these cuts. All right, students. The students mentioned several things. Of course, they did talk about CTE and maintaining various programs. These, of course, are the things that they're most interested in because it affects them directly every day. They talked about CTE, the health occupations came up as a program, but they also talked about arts, literature, math, sciences. They did, again, reiterate about suggesting cuts in administrative positions to save the funds that could be used for teacher salaries or support staff. Number 3, which I found interesting, that the student group was the one group that did focus on the compensation and teacher importance. So they did specifically mention that that working with their teachers, and they expressed concern that they should be paid fairly for their work and responsibilities. Student interaction and extracurricular activities, the things that they do with sports and clubs, the things that bring a little joy to school, including the things that help them with their mental health and learning success. And they were also the only group to bring up the advanced and accelerated courses as a kind of main theme. They want to make sure that we're able to hold on to those things that help with our high achieving students. Okay. Areas to investigate were very similar. I think the advanced and accelerated courses was the kind of the new thought in that one. And then maintaining teacher quality and years of service when considering staffing cuts. For community members, those who identified as those. Again, same kind of themes. We've got teacher retention and class sizes. They think it's directly linked to the quality of the education is directly linked to the teacher-student ratio. That curriculum and program prioritization, CTE came up again, core subjects, electives, all the things that we like. We would like to keep all the things we like. And I think that's come across on each one of them. Administrative cuts, same thing. I think not a group actually did not talk about those. Efficient use of resources, anything that you can do, selling unused properties, closing schools during summers, fully utilizing federal funds. They think that we can find ways for little ways to save costs to be able to not compromise the rest of the education. And then the support staff and specialized services, they know that we have other kinds of things beyond special education that are things that serve students directly to help them guide them through school. So generally, administrative cuts, as I talked about before, any kind of resource efficiency as selling properties or closing school during summer, and the balance between maintaining a well-rounded curriculum and the need to prioritize core subjects and all the same things we've heard before. And then finally, under others, and they may have selected other and other kind of categories, but this is the group that was on there, so we'll talk about this one too. Teachers and classroom sizes, the core curriculum and extracurricular activities, so the things you've heard before. Reduction in administrative roles and salaries. The student wellness and support, so they did talk about the overall well-being. This one came up as a core theme on this group that didn't come up necessarily as a specific number in the other groups. Emphasize the need for support staff and maintaining a caring atmosphere in schools. Obviously, the sentiment was to focus on any changes that, if we're making, as the changes we're making, that we focus on the impact on the students. And then trust and leadership. Participants voiced concerns about district leadership and the need to trust restoration, so to build back the trust again. They also suggested that a well-informed, well-trained school board is vital for a district's success. So other areas to investigate that haven't been talked about before, is specifically around building the trust in district leadership and the impact on students' mental health due to the proposed changes. That was a lot of information in there. Those have been posted to board book also, but I thought the summaries by type as well. So not a huge amount of surprises if you look over those things, but certainly good to hear from people and to see where the thousands of those votes that came in, where they kind of filtered toward the top. So I'll entertain any questions you might have or other things you'd like to know about.
How did you guys come about to summarize all those? Because that's impressive work to take that many.
Well, I will tell you that AI does an amazing job of summarizing things. And as much grief as it takes, there were 107,000, of the votes and things, so there's an averaging piece, and then there is AI built into the tool that helps to summarize. Now, AI is only as good as you can, so we have to go back and review all those to make sure, yep, that was okay, that all makes sense. These actually, the summary findings in these were probably the clearest, so they required the least amount of editing. When you go back and look through the way that things are done in an average, and they're done via quartile, and then some have more weighting than others as they go through the process. It's good to let the tool do those things and then go back and review. Because I'm a curious sort, I was watching all of the comments as they were coming in night after night after night and reviewing them. But this is the sense I got, and there are really no grand surprises, right? And people have lots and lots of ideas, but frankly, they want to see cuts in certain areas. They want to retain as many people as they can. They like what they like. And they want us to consider every option that's a non-staff option. So I think even though some of those things are things we could make a list of, it's important to make sure we're not missing anything, and it's also important to reflect, are people thinking sort of mostly the direction we're thinking about going? Of course, those are the kind of things we've been wanting to look at. And that's why that next item that we'll talk about tonight has some of those items on there. Those are the kind of things we want to consider.
Anything else about the survey?
Just a comment. It's helpful to have that feedback for us. While there might be a lot of variety of ideas on moving forward, you can definitely see some common themes among the subgroups, and so that's helpful, I think, for us as we move forward, making decisions. You can see, across the board as far as categories, the prioritization of teachers and classroom size. So that's consistent and again, just helpful for us as we move forward making decisions.
Yeah.
The amount of engagement's impressive. Did anybody go through and rate all the thoughts? I heard some people being up till midnight and not getting through them all. Did any way to tell if anyone succeeded in rating them all?
Well, they usually slow down at about midnight or 1, but I tried to outlast all of them and go till 2 or 3 to see who was still rating at that time.
That's impressive.
Yeah. I'm not sure if anybody rated all of them, but it's certainly possible. It's a lot of rating because you have to read
Yeah.
each one and
No,
decide. And,
that's,
yeah.
thank you.
I don't like that one. I don't like that one. I don't like that one.
Phil, I want to make sure you have a chance. Do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions, just kind of, it's an impressive piece, for sure, and all that went into it to get the rankings and stuff, and Joe said, no real surprises.
Yeah, I appreciate having the data.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, I think we might be ready to move on then to 3B, priorities for the 2024-25 budget.
All right, thank you, Chair Traeger. Additionally in there, I'll make that big enough so other humans can see it. There we go. So one of the things that we are, as we're going through, so taking some of the data obviously helped crystallize the fact that we're going in the right direction, and there are a million ways to try to make this all kind of fit. I thought it was important for us to bring forward a few of the items to know if there are things that we are missing that we should be going forward on, or things that you don't want to consider, right? We don't, because frankly, we are using every moment of every day, and so if there are things that are not of interest to the board to move forward on, then we'll stop those and go on with the other ones. So part of this is about a prioritization of the time we have to get forward to make the change we'll have to make. And a lot of this is focused around, honestly, employee well-being, because whether they're in the RIF or not, people want to know, and it's creating a lot of anxiety. So the more focus we can have on the things we need to go after, there will be reductions in force. That is part of the mix. There is no way to not do some of those. And the level of that will depend upon all the rest of the things that we can put together. But we are not going to go after a bunch of information items and changes and things if they're not things that you're interested in moving forward on, because we can focus our efforts on other things. So that's why I put this list together. I do want to highlight for the public and for you, this is not a decision of what's staying and going. This is a decision on you're directing me about what things to research to bring back to you in another meeting. Okay, so this is a list of some of the things that either we're already working on or considering to begin working on. But these are not decisions about what stays and what goes. Okay, this is about directing us to move ahead, doing the research and bringing back those information items to you later. Okay? Now I think we're going to talk about schedule stuff on additional board meetings later in the meeting. Yeah. Okay. So again, we're trying to find 8.8 as a reduction in expenditures for next year. We put a couple of things on this list, and you have it on paper, and then I think really if you'd like to discuss those or ask questions, we can go back and forth, and if you want to add to or take from, that's when we have to get to. As a board, you'll have to decide on the document as a whole. Unless you want to have an individual item that you want to vote on, you can do that too. You can do it either way. But it does need to be a direction from the whole board. Again, these aren't the decision about what's staying or going. These are what you're asking us to research.
And I'm assuming that you will help us adjust the document
I will.
as we work.
Yep.
Okay.
That's why it's live and not Memorex for all the old people in the room who know that commercial. All right, so priorities, a couple things that came up, class sizes and CTE programming. I just went ahead and put that on the list, things you want us to look at. For reductions, adjustments, and changes, DO staffing in all areas, administrative reductions at all levels, and a reduction in force, as I said before, in all employee groups. Okay. Other opportunities, things that I've just put on the list here, analyze transportation and food service costs, consider real estate or other assets that we may have for sale, We do have some consolidations. I used Title I specifically, but there are some federal title grants that we may be able to consolidate and do different funding with or different spending with, so we'll look at those. This one came up, there's a little angst on this one too about looking at the block schedule and going to a 7 period or going up from a 6 to a 7, so we'll research what that looks like. Suspending operations at smaller schools and moving students to other schools, or reorganizing the elementary K-8 schools to consolidate grade levels and reduce blends. Okay, so each one of those are at least some of the things that were things that came up during the survey that were sort of thematic. Are there any things you'd like to add to? Yes.
Just a clarifying question. So, looking at, well, reading a lot of the thoughts myself, and then the summary, and then the summary we have here, as far as reorganizing, reconfiguring, selling assets. Are you currently doing research into that, or you say we're going to?
Some of these things are already in process.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been working on this a lot as well, behind the scenes too, so I'd be curious to kind of share. I'm still waiting for Jeff to also update me, like facility needs as well, like when the last roofs were done, not done. What's most risk for like plumbing issues or catastrophic, like stuff we just don't have money for anymore.
Right.
So are you guys looking into?
Also. Yep.
Okay.
Anybody have questions about what these bullet points might mean? One question I asked earlier today was the difference between, like, I understand the block schedule moving to a 7-period day. I understand how that makes a savings. I did not quite understand the 6 to 7. So if you, actually, maybe you just want to explain
Sure,
that,
let's talk
'cause
about
I'm
it.
sure the public doesn't necessarily, everybody understand that either.
Right. So the reason we're looking at it is because it has to do with an efficiency of using staff. So when you are in a block schedule, you have a 0.75 efficiency, meaning that you have 3 out of 4 classes that you teach during the day. As a teacher, you have a preparation period. So that makes it so you have 3/4 of your teaching staff working with students, which then means you need more teachers to keep the class sizes down. If you go to a 6 out of 7, that means you're teaching 6 out of 7. Then you get to the 0.83, right? So 0.83 from 0.75 doesn't sound like a lot until you start putting a master schedule together and realizing, you won't need as many teachers to do it. So it is an increase. The middle school is only a 0.85. If you go from a 5, 8 or a 5.6, you're not really getting a lot of extra efficiency, but it may be an opportunity for us to be able to share staff between buildings because they are so close. And so if we're looking at, again, trying to retain as many staff as possible, we may have a halftime if they have matching schedules as far as the 2 schools go, we'd be able to share them between the 2 buildings. So the middle school one is more of exploratory. The high school one, it'll depend on what the numbers look like, but that's why we've asked them to look at that as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
If you can you touch on, second bullet point down, talks about consider real estate or other assets for sale. Are there currently real estate assets that are vacant, or is that in tandem with kind of the bottom 2 bullet points of looking at suspending operations at a school?
It's some of both.
Okay.
Yeah. There are some parcels that may be available for us to do something with. There may be that there are buildings on them. There's a whole range of things. Yeah. It wouldn't necessarily mean that you have to close the school and sell it, but there are some other opportunities you have of things that are in your assets. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess on that point also, just as long as it, moves any moves on this, just as long as they, you can make a short-term move for some money, but if it might, 4 or 5 years down the road, you might be kicking yourself in the foot and,
That's
why
correct.
did we do that? We needed that space,
Mhm.
So we get a short-term gain, but now you have a long-term problem, so.
It's a one-time dollar, and so you do have to
Yeah.
consider that. And that will be part of the balance.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're not making those kinds of decisions tonight.
No.
That's important to, again, reiterate that these are just to explore what could help us get to our number.
I want to second that. If we say we have an asset we sell, like you said, it's a one-time purchase. We still have the operational issue on the back end that we're just going to go right back into the hole because we're going to keep going farther in. So, you know, it may help, but in the long term, we have to make, and that's what we're doing here. The SIA stuff, I'm kind of confused about. Student investment account. When you say focus on staffing priorities, because these accounts are especially for special education, not,
No, I'm glad you asked that question. So
Okay.
SIA is the student investment
Investment
account,
account.
right, which is funded by the corporate activity tax.
Mhm.
That's a new thing, but it's not for special education, it's for all things. So you have a community engagement around what your priorities are in SIA. And I don't know what they are right now, so I can't detail them, but you look at your SIA plan, if we make adjustments to that plan to staff in different areas, let's say that it becomes important for us to focus more on class size than it does on support, other kinds of support activities that we do. We have to do some community engagement around that, but we would refocus our SIA dollars on something else. One of those allowable expenses, of course, is lower class size. So SIA is used for lots of things, right?
that's across the board? Or just
Across
for
the board.
Okay.
Yep. And so what we may do is look and see, are there opportunities within SIA to apply those toward other things than what they're applied to now?
So if I hear you, then it would free up resources within the general fund or allow us to reduce within the general fund if we're using the SIA dollars to fund, let's just say, headcount to deal with class size
Mhm.
issues.
Right, and sometimes we call that like braiding funding. We'll take some funding from this funding stream and that one. So SIA was something that was brought on top. So you have a general fund and then you have several other things. Measure 98, which is high school success. You have the SIA and you have several others. So those are the kind of things that do we want to look at then, going through a process of considering the SIA grant and other ones to figure out how many of those funds should be targeted toward other directions.
Yeah, because thus far, our SIA funds have mostly been used for things that we wouldn't have been able to pay for out of the general fund previously. So things that helped support student behavior, I don't know what else, all of the things on the list are. But that's an example of something that, maybe we go a different direction on that.
Well, to my understanding, those SIA funds are highly analyzed and audited.
Mhm.
So whatever we would take those money for, they'd have to still fall in the category of which they were purposed.
Yes.
Correct.
Didn't those regulations basically back off during COVID, and now they're coming back on?
No, the SIA ones were pretty,
Okay.
it was the ESSER funds that were relatively broad, and the ESSER were the federal stimulus dollars. Now, the SIA, you went through a process, I think that was, we were still in person. It was pre-pandemic. We were going through the public engagement process to try to build our SIA plans, went through a whole thing, sort of went into the pandemic. The funds didn't come in as much, and they began to come in more, but we still have to go through a public engagement process. You can do it through a survey, you can do lots of things. There are lots of ways to just say, hey, by the way, this is what our plan's going to be. It has to come before the board has to discuss and then pass that, yes, that's how we're gonna use our SIA. One of the allowables, and that's why I said that earlier, one of the allowables is, of course, to reduce class size, which is staffing, and then you would do other things with your general fund that might backfill, yeah.
Dr. Joe, there
Yeah.
seems to be a community consensus or consensus amongst all the participants that that the district is top-heavy with administration, and you've, I don't know, only been here a little while now, but do you have a sense, is there low-hanging fruit in that category in our district? And I don't mean to put you on the spot by any means by naming any positions or anything like that, but do you see in your time so far that we have significant opportunities there?
I see opportunities at all levels to make reductions. I don't want to go further than that, but I will tell you that there's always the perception of that because people want to go there first because it feels like it's furthest from the classroom, and that's true. I had somebody suggested we should, wipe out the whole district office. Like, well, people like to get paid. Vendors like to get their bills paid. There are a few other things that are, operational when you're running a 500-person operation, right? So there are some things that are necessary. Can you make changes? Yeah, we're going to have to. And there are other things that we sort of have to hold on to just to operate something with this many facilities and this many people who are coming in every day. We do have to provide, safety and security. We do have to provide a few other things. But yeah, there are opportunities to make some changes. Yeah.
Joe?
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Phil.
On this list, when you look at it, there is, I guess what I'm thinking of coming up with 8.8, other than maybe the property, there's nothing on here that's huge that can do it by itself. I guess what I'm getting at is, can we really eliminate any of these off the list and still know that we'd get to 8.8? Do you follow what I'm saying?
I do follow. And, when you're talking about an organization that's, what, 85% people, 85% your reduction is going to be people, right? So some of these things are going to be some tinkering. The SIA piece, yes, we'll keep putting them. I think it's important to explore as many buckets as you can to say, can we add this one? Can we add this one? Some things are, to use the phrase, cut off your nose to spite your face. Sometimes like, well, am I reducing or changing all of these variables, messing everything up in the whole district, and I'm going to save $100,000? Is that worth it or not worth it? So some of these things won't be worth it. Like that, yes, it saves money.
That was going to be my next question.
And then it's going to make everybody crazy. So there'll be a cost to benefit in all of these. And that's why I said at the outset, there will be a reduction in force. There will be fewer people. That's a necessity. Some of these things will help with that, and I think it is important to explore as many as you can. Some things are not possible or not relevant, and so we're trying to narrow our focus a little bit.
Just to reiterate, so you might come back and say, well, if we do this, then we save $150,000. And then at that point, will you make a recommendation to us about your best recommendation, whether that is worth it or not? Because just because it's cheaper or it's going to save us money doesn't mean that's always the best choice.
Right.
And so is that a chance where you'll come with a list of recommendations and then we will have to approve those?
Yeah, so in our next meeting, we bring back some of those things. We'll have some costs associated with them and discussion about each kind of a thing. Like, here's what this does and doesn't do. It's impossible for you to know every little permutation of things that will happen. Possible for any of us to know, not just you. Like, if we do this, what happens over here? But yeah, we'll come back and talk about the discussion on some of those. Eventually, what we have to do is get to a budget document, right? A budget plan. Here's the plan for next year's budget. That will then have the complete picture, because it may be that we'll want to move ahead with X, Y, and Z, but it turns out if I do X, it makes Y and Z not work because it cancels out the savings of one or the other. But at least knowing what the scope of the savings could be or what that discussion might be. So I'll use the one that is politically charged, the one about, do we talk about closing schools or not, suspending schools or not, right? Because there are two very adamant sides about that. So it may not be on the cost to benefit, it may not benefit enough. So we've done this, we've done that, but now our busing costs have gone up, so the $102,000 we saved there, we're spending 60 of it over here. So did we really achieve enough with that one, right? So there may be those, and that'll be the discussion we have next time. Here's what we found for savings. Here are the things that are cantilevered on others, so they don't really, save us that much. And so you'll find some ways that they'll fit together. Eventually, my job is to bring to the budget committee and to the board a balanced budget that says, here are the things we're going to do, here are the reductions we have to make to get there.
You'd mentioned kind of the last two bullet points here, about the maybe moving students or consolidating or changing the makeup of some of our K-8 schools and grade levels. That I think we have to look at everything in detail, and everything's on the table as we've talked about in terms of savings. But especially going into next year, which is we're really trying to balance that 24-25 budget. Knowing that we're going to have some in reserves and then have a plan to build those reserves back up. So next year is going to be the toughest year. I really have a hard time, and it makes me pause a little bit to, again, not to say we can't look at it, to quantify it. I think that's prudent, but to really look at if we close or consolidate some of our K-8 schools, really to kind of hone in next year. I'm concerned with the damage that would do long-term in our district. And again, I have a hard time with that one. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at it, but I think we have to look long-term at our community, and we have to look at the communities that make up the collective of Silver Falls School District, and that those are made up of our kids and our communities, and we need to make sure we try to preserve those as much as possible. I think it would be a huge detriment to consolidate and or close any of our K schools at this point. That's my opinion. But I think I think we'd do some long-term harm to our district if we did.
Aaron, I appreciate your comments. One thing that, this has been a topic that's been around for as long as I can, remember, obviously. But one thing I think that I don't remember ever seeing is really good comprehensive evaluation. There's certainly a perception in the community, parts of the community, that the schools are more costly and that there would be some savings. And so it would be good to know, I think, whether that's in fact true, and if it is true, to what degree it's true. And maybe we'll find it's not true, but I think actually having the research on that would be helpful to everybody.
That's simply why I started on the project. I was tired of everybody saying that this is more expensive or that's more expensive. And me being on the long-range facilities for a long time, I had access to how much, well, they're public, everybody could have access to it. I just had it easier because they gave us in a handout of what each school costs every year, utilities to run, water, gas, even the custodial services at each and every school in our district, combined with what their square footage is, how many kids they have in each school, how many kids could be in each school, because you have two enrollment numbers. You have what they are currently doing, and you have what they're capable of doing. And those will give you drastic numbers, differences based on the cost per student. And plus, I also did FTE per student at each and every campus. And so just kind of seeing what the number was going to show us. But to you, I don't have the transportation, right? That's probably way more nuanced. I don't even know how. I'm very interested to see how you guys get that information. And plus, behind all these numbers, there are hidden numbers. Social value, cultural value, at each and every one of these schools, whether it's Mark Twain, Silvercrest, or Evergreen, a high school. And then there's the unintended consequences of, will we ever pass a bond ever again? If we do close a school, where are we going to put them? Do we have room? Mm-hmm. If we close out of district transfers, that decreases our revenue, which means now we don't have teachers, we can't pay our teachers again. It's a very complex issue, and we're looking at least I know we're looking at it. Two questions for you, Dr. Joe.
Okay.
Why the 8.8? I'm trusting you guys. Why not 7? Why not 6? Because from the beginning it's like, okay, we're going to 8.8, and is that because obviously we have to pay out the TAN, the 3.82, and coming back on top of that, is it to get ahead for the next round of COLAs, or like what's the strategy for going? I just like to know.
Sure. So, and I'm not going to go into too many details because I'll get it wrong and Jackie will have my head, right? So we'll have Jackie back. But let's do on the simple math side of it. Of the 8.8, 3.8 thereabouts is the repayment of the TAN that happens to happen before December 30th, right? December 31st. The TAN is the loan, essentially, that creates a cash flow that allows us to actually pay our bills through until about November when the tax revenue comes in. So one of the issues about not having a healthy ending fund balance is not about having money that you're keeping and not spending. It's actually money that you use to pay your bills. It's the money that is in the account that allows you to get through those months. And so while we get a double payment from the state school fund in July, so you get 2 there, that helped a lot of districts not have to go with a TAN. Lots and lots of districts used to do a TAN every year. And there are school districts who are doing a TAN this year along with us who are not going through major crises because they don't have enough cash to get through to November. So the other part of that goal then is to build up enough cash reserve that you don't have to apply for TAN. It may be possible, and I will put in the budget narrative, the one that the superintendent writes inside the budget book, that you may have to go for another TAN. Not because you have misspent your money, but because you don't have enough cash to get to the other side. Eventually, when you have built up your cash reserves, that allows you to not have to do that. You can pay your bills all the way through, and you can stop doing those, and you can work toward a proper reserve fund, right? So in this plan, then 3.8, then you've got $1 million that we're setting aside as your cash reserve, as your ending fund balance to try to build $1 million for next year. You should have somewhere between 6 to 8 or 9 actually in the bank. Really, that's where you should be. Especially at some point in the future when you decide if you're going to go out for a bond at some time, you're going to need enough cash reserves that then you qualify for a high enough credit rating that then you get the best sale possible and the most benefit on selling off a bond, right?
So off that last point, because I didn't know how important that was for bond ratings of having money in reserves, it goes to if we, for some reason, reduce the student enrollment or buildings or any of it, it's the unintended, or is there a value associated to districts that have more students or programs that are accessible to us based on how well we're operating the district as far as student-teacher ratios or?
No, so those are far more in the financial world. They want to make sure that you can pay your bills all the way through November, because they know how they work, right? These are municipal bonds that work with school districts all the time. So when they sell a construction bond, for instance, or a capital construction bond, they know that if you have a certain dollar amount in the bank that you are fiscally responsible, then you're going to be able to pay your bills. You're not going to have to go out for a loan to pay the bills, because during that year, you do pay back on your bond, right? You're paying back on this loan that you got from selling a municipal bond. And so the ratings are really on that. And then they'll look at some of your history. They'll look at some of the changes that have been made. You'll have a different leader in at that point. That all helps. So when we were in Newburgh, when I was in Newburgh, we started with $139,000 in the bank. We weren't going to get a bond. By the time I left, we had $9 million. So we had enough to be able to pass a bond, which we had done the year prior. But because we had enough reserves in the bank, then we got a higher rating. And then when we go out to the bond sale, we also got bond premium on top of that, so it allowed us to do the projects we had. So that's important. Outside of bonding, let's just talk about cash flow, because that's actually the most important thing you've got right now, is to make sure that you can pay your bills. And that's why $1 million of that 8.8 is that way.
Thanks, Doctor.
I
okay,
think,
it's how it
I
is.
think on the last bond attempt, I think we had the second highest rating, if I remember correctly, just as a point of information, when we went out for the financing.
Even with our reserves that low?
Yeah.
Joe, if I
Yep.
could ask a question that I've been pondering over all this. As far as out-of-district students, do we get enough to actually cover the expense of those out-of-district students? You get what I'm saying? We get from the state X amount, but is that covering what we spend on?
So every district gets an allocation based on what's called ADMW, right? The weighting of the
Right.
students. And so when students are what are called inter-district transfer, meaning they come from one district to us, that means that their home district releases them as a student there, which they become a full-time student with us, meaning they bring every dollar with them. They become part of our weighting. They are now legally our student. So their costs are covered like everybody else's, right? They're part of our funding formula. So if we had, every kid that we get is part of our dollar amount. So yeah, they cover them as if they were from anywhere else. If they were from the back 40, or if they are from a different city, they're all in that same mix. So their costs are covered the same way everybody else's are. And then often, if they're coming from out of town, we're not busing them from out of town into town. Right? They
Right.
may get dropped off at a place that we already have an existing bus line. Same way we do for some other ones. Like if you can catch a bus along this bus line, you're welcome to get on the bus. We're not going to just drive by you. But we don't do specialized bus runs out to, I'll just hammer on Salem. We don't go to Salem to go pick up kids and bring them in. So they're required to transport themselves, and that's actually part of the inter-district transfer agreement.
Now, would this be true of all the weighted kids too?
Of the which kids?
The weighted kids, the ones that we get more than one equivalency from? So they come in with whatever equivalency they have also? And you follow what I'm saying?
I do follow, but it's actually not done that way. So it's all of the kids you have create the formula.
Okay.
Right? So the formula, the number we get is different than every other district because it has the mathematical part, how many kids live in poverty, how many students are EL students, how many of them have special education, how many, so there's a pregnant parenting weight, right? There's all those weights. So
Right.
it's not that they're weighted individually differently, it's our formula. Every child goes into that formula and here are the numbers you have, and this is, so the number of those kids then creates a weighted formula that is multiplied by the actual number of, the eyeballs you have coming in. And that's, so they're not weighted specially if they're special in some way or another. So that's all just part of our overall formula.
I want to clarify though, for people, that they do have to pay the school bond from the district they're in. So like, say we pay off our bond in June 27, and we haven't passed another one, they're still gonna have to pay on where they reside, Salem school bond. So like.
Correct, they still have to pay their taxes.
Correct.
There are not good things that happen if you don't pay your taxes, so, yeah, they do have to pay their own local taxes.
Yep.
I have a question just about, well, just a confirmation. So in general, we have, demographically, our birth rates have declined nationwide. We are generally in a downward trajectory for enrollment.
Mhm.
It's probably not going to increase anytime soon, right? So in general, we are going to be reducing the amount of money that is coming in. That's our trajectory at this point. So we are going to be trimming and trimming and trimming and trimming. Like, this is not a one-time thing. So I just want to make that super clear. And I think it relates to the idea of closing schools in the sense of there's FTE and then there's operating costs, right? And so, like, if we're going to have to reduce FTE, that's just everywhere, right? And the difference between reducing FTE at one school and another is, you know, I guess that's the question. It's like, we're talking about closing schools. Maybe it doesn't shake out that it actually costs more because the operating costs don't support that. So I guess, I don't know, what I'm trying to say is that I'm just trying to wrap my head around how closing schools would actually save us. And that seems to me where we're going is that maybe you would explore the intricacies of all of that.
Yeah, and it may be that we go the other direction, right? We may push students out to fill up more, depending upon what those look
Yes.
like. So we'll use all the enrollments to look at them. Your savings are basically on, you know, either the leadership at the school. Of course, students will go with, I mean, teachers have to go with students, but when you have really small class, then you have another one that has to balance that out. So let's say that your average class size, you want it to be 25. Well, if you have a class of 12, that means the other one needs to be 30-something, right, in order to make that average work when you're looking at balancing across the way. So when you look at either closing or consolidating grade levels in place, that allows you to then have more of the kids of the same grade level in the class, and it lets you be more efficient just in terms of numbers.
Well, and we had that at Pradham and Central Howell. I think the Pradham kids came to Central Howell for kindergarten, and then they went to Pradham after
Right.
that. And so that last bullet, kind of, we've done that in a very
Right.
small way before. And if we reorganized, it may not be forever, right? It could be just for
Correct.
the conditions for that school year.
Right. And that's why I did actually put suspend, I didn't put close, because there are ways that you could do that, or maybe not. But again, back to the grade level thing, it may be that we're gonna put all the kindergartners from these two schools in this one school, because we've got 6 here, and we've got 12 there, and we've got 2 over there, depending on how many kids come in, right? So it would make most sense, like, we'll do a kindergarten year at this one place, or you do a K1, 2 at one, and a 3, 4, 5 at another. So there are lots of those kind of things. Whether they save lots of money, that's the research we'll have to do to figure that out. And there won't be lots of definites because you don't exactly know who's going to come back. I do think it is important for you in the next year to do a population research study from whoever group. You know, we've used PSU in the past. It could be anybody, doesn't matter. But you need to be able to look. And then, you know, people like to say, well, it's 10 years out. Like, well, yeah, it's really only 2 years out. Even though they give you 10 years, you can only bet on a little bit. Statewide, we've seen 30 to 35,000 students fewer than we had pre-pandemic. They're not coming back, right? We're past the pandemic now, a couple of years. So that's those adjustments that we're making. Part of that 8.8, back to your question from before, is a readjustment on the amount of revenue we're going to get for the number of staff that we can afford. And so a large part of that adjustment is we need to adjust, you know, downward. One of the things that ESSER funds did in a both positive and negative way is it did mask some of that because we were able to hold on to things. We hired people, we were trying to do more supports for kids. None of these things are bad things. These are all good things. But at some point you can't afford them because that's not what we used to be able to afford pre-ESSER, right? And pre-SIA we could afford even less, right? And starting in 1990 with the passage of Measure 5, and as the costs go up and the only thing that we're getting on is revenue, 3% growth, but everything else has gone higher. So you can only afford so many things. So part of that reduction is really a right sizing to afford the amount of staff that you have at the rate you pay them for the number of kids you're getting. And there's just some financial part of that. So that's a big part of it. So yeah, you'll have to look at the enrollment. I think it's important to understand, are people moving in, are people moving out? And people forget that, like, I'm always selfish. I want to have people move in when they've got kids who are just pre-K so they can start at kindergarten so I can get 13 years of them. Because if they're only coming in at the high school level, if they're only coming in, or if people aren't moving out and they're staying in their properties for longer and they don't have kids, well, those kids aren't coming to school, right? So you have to kind of understand your demographic, understand what's happening in your town. But having a study done would be helpful. I always chose the low in terms of the growth, because I was always kind of thinking that way, and sometimes people choose always the high. So look in there and they'll give you some good indicators. But it would be important to know, to relate that to birth rates in your county and what's happening just in terms of the kind of building, how many permits are being pulled, what kind of permits are they, multifamily, whatever those things are. Those are all important factors in being able to project into the future about what you're going to do with the budget.
And your experiences, because I know that I read the population study from Woodburn. It was very well done. The pulling of the permits and that kind of growth, though, can't perform the birth rate, right? We only have
Correct.
so many kids.
And it also has to do with how much things cost. So when they were doing those, and this was one of the arguments we had with the city, was that they're building these apartments, and they're 2-bedroom apartments and going for $2,500 a month. Well, the folks that we were serving couldn't afford that. They were moving to other areas. They were moving to Jefferson, they're moving to Jervis, they're moving to other places they could afford. And so while there was more housing available, it was less affordable, right? So there's that other balance too. So I'm probably highly conservative in that. When I wait until I actually see them in the seat before I count them, like, okay, now I got them. Because those studies can only tell you so much, how many kids were born, but right now, especially with what costs are, you don't know how many people can afford what and what rent is going to look like, and so those are all important factors. And having some reserve allows you to go down more slowly if you're going to have to make further reductions in the next 10 years. So we just don't know what that'll look like.
Thank you.
And Silverton housing policies in the long term over decades are not conducive to creating more and more affordable housing. They just, even though the state has been making some new legislation, our city has not followed suit with that. So that's just what I've seen personally. Housing continues to get much more expensive, even though there's opportunities, I think, to reduce those costs. I'm not sure why that is, if it's just the politic of the town and not wanting growth, but I think that's a reality here that we're going to be facing for a while.
I have an enrollment question about Jervis.
Can Derek go, 'cause he-
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I cut him off
Oh,
last
I
time.
didn't.
That's all right.
Sorry.
Obviously, there's lots to talk about. I think, Dr. Moore, you're looking for direction about this list, and I think we all recognize there's only so many financial levers that we can pull on to meet the deficit that we're looking at. We've had a lot of conversation about the bottom two, just because I think they are so impactful. And I think with that, I think we understand the community impact, and I think it's important for us to definitely take a hard look at the finances and be able to weigh that against any potential community impact. So one question I did have with the transportation service costs, is there any potential costs with like restructuring the school week, looking at going from like a 5 to a 4, weighing that against having some of those reductions in transportation, food costs, or with that end being something where we wouldn't recognize enough benefits? I know you don't have the numbers, but if that was a recognized saving, X number of teacher positions, and again, I know we're looking at all options, but just something I'm curious about.
So we've actually asked them to do multiple things for us as far as the people who first students. Like, we need to what it looks like this, like a 4-day work week. What's a 4-day week look like? What does the reduction from 42 to 31 buses look like? What is this? What is that? You also have to remember that they have costs they have to cover, right? So those changes will make some kind of difference. But if you're putting, let's say, K1, 2 in one building and 3, 4, 5 in another building, you're still running the same routes, right? So it may, in some cases, it could increase in certain things, because now I've got to run that route twice, because I'm doing less of a neighborhood route, more of a milk run. So that's that cost will certainly go in there. And we'll know, we'll have a daily rate, because you have daily rates on buses, you have, mileage, and then how much over the certain number of hours per bus. And so there's a calculation in there. It may or may not, it may actually end up being completely cost neutral, could cost more on busing. So some of those are going to be guesses. We have an idea of what a difference between a certain number of routes would be if we were to cut routes by 25%. Is it going to save us enough money to do it? And that's back to that question, like going from a 5-day to a 4-day. Well, it may end up costing you the same amount of money. Have you saved anything? Well, not really. So let's not do that one. Or is consolidating the grade levels going to make a huge difference? Well, it saves over here and it costs over there. So some of these are going to be like, well, these are great ideas to save you some money and they cost you. So do we upset all the apple carts and then end up kind of in the same place? Yeah. That's a great, guys, thanks for asking that question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just comment, I'd like to just thank you. I mean, lots of solutions you're looking at, and I really appreciate the fact that you're looking at them through the lens of long term, so it doesn't interrupt that. So, as far as enrollment, I know part of the thing we should really, I don't know what we can do, but a lot of people are choosing to go private school or staying home, and I don't know what we can do. I mean, I got a niece and a nephew, and they each have, well, one has 4 and one, but there's 10 kids between the two families, and they're going to private schools at Parkersville and Prattle. There's 10 kids, and I don't know. All 4 of those parents were schooled in the Silver Falls schools. And I don't know how, that's a delicate issue, but that is a real issue that we have to deal with.
And that was what I was wondering too, like, can we plan for that? Because it is a real thing, is that if we close a school, is a chance that those families don't go to another Silver Falls schools, that they choose something else, and then that's revenue lost.
Correct.
So, is there a way for us to plan for that?
No, there's no way to really know about any of those. I mean, some of this stuff's just a gamble. I will say, and as a system generally, we're going to have to really think hard about the kinds of things that we offer, the way that we offer them, the kinds of things that bring kids in to school, right? I think that's why CTE showed up there a lot. And CTE is expensive, right? Because you have fewer kids, you have more equipment, you have other things, but are there other things that continue to bring students in? And back to the closing of, are they going to return to another school? I don't know, and we can't force them, and they won't tell us, right? So we often get these things where they will say, well, why'd they leave? Like, well, we can ask them, but they don't have to tell us. And often you'll get as many kids coming in as are going out. So we have this many kids leaving Silverton, yes, and you have this many kids coming in, and it's a real close in terms of the balance, right? So we'll have to do our best, but we have some work to do just around what we're going to offer as a system generally. And that's back to the cost to benefit. Maybe there's no benefit in this because the cost is too high, just in terms of the loss of community or the things like that.
Well, and again, I just want to reiterate that cost is not the only factor. I mean, we obviously have some work to do to limit our costs, but,
Income side. I'm talking about the income side. More students means more income, and we're losing students, therefore losing income.
Yeah, but cost is more than just dollars, right? There are other kinds of costs that come into it. And in those cases, those 10, those are dollars, but there are also community costs.
Yeah. And I remember been on the board for over 12 years now. Maybe Wally can remember this. I seem to recall I think it was around 3% of our kids did not. Like 97% of the kids went to the public schools. And now it's like, I don't know, 12, 13% are leaving, something like that. So that's sad. And maybe that's the way it's going to be in the future, but that's sad. Yeah. I'll just leave it at that. I wish it wasn't that way. So anyway.
Me too.
I'd kind of like to add in here just some perspective on this. I'm really pleased to see the discussion on the enrollment. I really urge the board to consider the population study. The state, of course, the state of Oregon is doing those population studies. They have that data, and their information is enrollment is dropping statewide, birth rates are dropping statewide. So now they start looking at, well, our funding can drop. So we need to be very cognizant of the decisions we're making today because of the potential long-term impact on state funding for school systems. So be very, very cognizant of when we're talking about what does that reduction need to be today. It's not about today. It is about today. It's also about tomorrow. We have a new biennium starting at the end of this next school year. We do not know what the state school funding is going to look like. We already have a preview into some significant increases that are coming to us from the state in terms of employer payroll costs. And we have got to prepare for a long-term forecasting for sustainable operations here in Silver Falls. So yeah, it's a lot of assumptions, and just really appreciate that you're taking this enrollment concern very critically. So thank you, guys.
So Kim, let me make sure that I'm understanding. So like, I think last year it may be, we were worried that our enrollment was dropping, and we were worried about, you know, obviously the revenue impact of that, but it turns out that, you know, because the pot stayed the same, we actually ended up getting a per pupil increase.
Correct.
But what you're saying is that the state's gonna say, we're gonna make the pot smaller now because we have fewer students overall
And
too.
I want to be clear, the state has not said they're going to make it smaller,
they're-
but the discussions
Got it.
are that,
Concern.
do the funding increases need to continue at the rate that they had been, which had not been sustainable at the rate it had been. So that is the long-term concern. So Silver Falls represents 0.62% of the state enrollment. So we get 0.62% of this, and I need to validate, but that is the number that I recall at the top of my head is, and so when, you know, the pot changes sizes, as long as we stay at our fractional share, then we're fairly healthy. When the pot size is not adequate, then regardless of the fractional share that we have, our funding is not adequate.
Thank you.
I have a enrollment question.
Okay.
In a month, we're gonna know if one of our neighboring districts is gonna pass a bond or not, if we're gonna close their district, if they hold true to their word. Have we contacted them to expect if they close their district, how many we'd possibly gain?
So they would be, what they have mentioned is that would be for the 25, 26, so they would still be going through next year, and then those discussions would happen. That would actually have to do with, in the dissolution of a school district, then working with other boards, there are some determinations on that. So we don't know where the lines would be, frankly. But the students who live closest to those areas would then go out to those different districts. So we don't know how many that would be.
Would they redraw boundaries, or is that how they would do it?
Right. Right, because we remember, so way back in the old days, ESDs were the county office of education. The county office would then determine what those lines were. So the official name of Silver Falls School District is not Silver Falls School District. You are Marion County School District, right? So everybody has a number, whatever. So they would be dissolving that district, which would mean a redrawing of the boundaries by the state, who now takes on that responsibility. So those boundaries would be drawn by them, and then we go from there. So we don't know what that would look like.
And I guess I got two clarifying questions, because I don't actually know the answer to this, 'cause I see it on, how many charter schools are we allowed to have? I heard 2. Just out of curiosity, I'm not saying we should change them, is there a limit?
I don't have the exact answer
Okay.
for you. There was a limit of some kind. There are a couple different limits. One is the limit of charter schools you can have, and the other one is the limit of percentage of students in your boundaries that can be, and the other one is the percentage of students who can leave for a charter school. So I would not want to hazard a guess.
And then the last one for enrollment issues would be, I've heard a rumor that there's a limit on homeschool kids, percentage-wise, that maybe could be involved in district activities, or is that all just baloney?
No, you usually you have policy around that too. So it depends upon if there is space available. So sometimes you may have homeschool students who wish to participate in sports or in a class that's a non-core class. So generally it's around non-core classes. Like they have an art class, photography, or there's an auto shop or something, there's an available space. So sometimes, and I don't know what your policy is, I haven't looked at that right now, but those policies usually exist on on a percentage basis, this is how many we can say will come in to be able to afford to do that.
And that's a district by district basis.
Mhm. And then you also have, and it may be, there are some times where, so we have some districts who want to send students to the WCA through the WSD. They register their student part-time at the school district, and then they would receive funding to then send the kids in. So there are lots of different options that way, but, yeah.
One thing though, Josh, because I think I get where you're asking about the charter schools, like the concern that I have about getting more charter schools potentially. I mean, I think this is a relevant question because that some people are, well, I just think it's relevant. If we have more charter schools, those population, those geographical areas are still part of the Silver Falls School District, and I wonder about the long-term possibility of passing a bond, because charter schools are not included in the whole bond scenario.
I guess I'd clarify, I literally just wanted to know.
I know, I just think
Because,
it's a good
yeah,
thing to talk about in
yeah.
general.
Because I just, honestly, I don't like not knowing something, and I don't like not having an answer, so I guess I took the
We'll find out.
opportunity,
Yeah,
Joe.
yeah,
So-
we'll find out. There is some specificity around that. It's been a long time since they launched, and
Yeah.
when I was a younger person, I remembered more, but I had to write it down and go look at it later.
One, a bullet point that I don't see listed here, or maybe it's in with one, is kind of like we did this year. We used several furlough days to help make a $1.2 million deficit in this year's budget, or in this year's funding. Is that an area we could look at? And again, I'm not for reducing hours for our students, because that's paramount, as we've heard from our community, as we all know. But would that also help us preserve headcount then, to ensure that we could use targeted furlough days to ensure that we don't have to reduce as many of our staff levels? I don't know if you've had any thoughts on that, or something that we could look into, because that could be a lever we could pull. Again, we added a handful in, and we were able to save $1.2 million this year, or make up $1.2 million this year. Again, not a fan, but is that something we could look into?
It's certainly something we can look into. I didn't put it on here on the list because it's not a thing that we can do definitely. We asked our employees this year, and they gave 1.2 million. They gave 7 or 8 of their days. I did not put it on this list because I would see that as one of our final resorts if we can't get to it, or if we get to a place where we've cut so many that we have to go back for that. So I would believe in working on everything else that we can before we get to that. Is that on the table? Well, I put it on the table whether it gets picked up or not. So I didn't put that on as a thing to count on. Right. I think that would be foolish for us to say we're going to count on that to happen. Right. So
Yeah.
Is it something we'll talk about? I'm sure that we will, but I think we have to go through the exploration of all of these things first before we go back asking again.
Well, and I think the big picture, we all know it has to be trade-offs.
Yeah,
right? If we
right.
want to keep staffing levels as high as possible, if we want to ensure that we're keeping our classes as small as possible, we might have to give up something else. And that,
Right.
again, might be a day here or a day there. Not ideal. Neither situation is perfect. But again, some creative thinking along those lines, which I know you guys are doing every which way from Sunday. So I'm just saying that's another thing I think maybe we could look into.
Right, and I didn't put it on here because it wouldn't be a definite number, because we wouldn't get to that place at the end. So these are the other things we can control. The other ones are, I would say, again, last resort. We get to a point, here's what we can save, we can do that, but we have other work to do before we can get to that, I think.
I have a comment. One thing that it's tough to talk about, but it's the way it is. When Jackie first put that graphic up there, it really hit home as far as the way enrollment has gone over the last 4 years and the way staffing has gone over the last 4 years. And I think what gets lost in the shuffle here, and this isn't going to be very popular for me to say, but to get the programs we have, to get the class sizes we have, to get the incredible staff we have in everywhere, we have added more than our student population warranted when compared to our funding. I mean, that's part of how we got where we're at, is too much added while student population was going down, which meant not as much money coming in to support that staff. And we've got to remember that, and this goes along with what Kim was just saying a minute ago as far as long range. We've got to get that staffing graph to halfway align with our population instead of going completely opposite of it. And it's tough because there's faces on every one of those people, and we know them, and they're great staff, whether they were hired yesterday or 10 years ago. But it is a tough place that we're in, and that, as you mentioned earlier, Joe, most of our expenses is staff. There's no way around that. And to get that much money, and I think it's something that gets forgotten, how we got where we are, and was by overspending for what our student population was. So I think that's important to keep in mind as we're making these decisions.
Appreciate that, Phil.
Just a question, because I know it's on a lot of folks' mind. After we kind of move forward tonight, timeline, I know a lot of folks are anxious about knowing what their lives look like come June. And so, after tonight's meeting, do you have a rough idea of when you might be able to come back to us with some of this information? If you can't speak to it, that's fine, but I know that's weighing heavy on our entire community. So if you could speak to that at all.
Yeah, so two things. One, and I appreciate you bringing that up. All of this process is about our people and getting as much of this information as possible. I know that tonight was a lot, and we put two big things together. But we have to take care of the people we have, whether we're releasing them or whether we're keeping them. We have to let them know as soon as we can. We did look at the board schedule, and I know that people are kind of in and out of. We actually found that even though you have a meeting on Tuesday night, that we would try to hold one on Wednesday night also, and come back with as much of this information as possible. We won't be able to have all of it, but we do have a few days that we'll be able to work on and try to get some of these things together. So we thought if we could do Wednesday, and we'll figure out what we can do on bringing back some of that information and get us as much as possible for further discussion, that'd be the time to do it. We had a hope of trying to get it out the door before the other large unnamed district was releasing $71 million worth of the folks. If we can do that for the first phase, we will try. It's important that we do this right and not do it expediently because we want to get things done. So there's this balance of making sure that we get that right, and we do have people who have a lot of anxiety, and I think that's important to balance that too. So we'd like to at least suggest looking at and doing a Wednesday, and I think everybody was available in or out of town, but you'd be able to be online to be able to do it too. For Wednesday of next week, because I know that Thursday was a hard day for most, and that just puts 2 meetings in a row, but I think that's probably fine. So I'd like you at least to consider that, and we can decide
I
that.
would say we need to do whatever we can and meet as much as we can to get them the answers they need.
Yep.
If it means meet 5 days a
For
week,
sure.
we meet
For
5 days
sure.
a week. So, to help you get your stuff done so they know.
Well, we would bring back as much as we had for that meeting of the things that we've either completed or getting close to completing,
Yeah.
so you have an idea, and then we can keep rolling.
Good question, Derek.
Joe, you mentioned like a wave. That's one thing that I've been trying to conceptualize for the people who are concerned about, the RIF. Obviously, taking care of them can mean letting them know earlier rather than later so that they can pursue other opportunities. And at the same time, I just want to clarify what's the rule for, we have a callback period, right? In case funding is actually better than expected, then we have like a specific callback order. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, so in general, the process is that we look at what we have for our expenditures, our revenue, we bring them in, we say, okay, now we're going to build these things. And if we don't have a place because of where they are in the seniority list or in the special skills or all the other things that we have for that document, then they go on a cannot place list, and then we wait and see if things shift around, and that happens. And then when there is a reduction in force, there's a 27 months that they have right to recall, meaning that they're on the list, and we start again at the top of that list, of the recall list, and we go down and we offer them a position if we have a position that fits their licensure, fits their experience, things like that. So yeah, it's 27 months that they have. So they could be employed. Let's say they get a job in a district. We say, hey, by the way, for the 25 school year, we've got a job at Pradham. You want to join us? Yes, I'll take it back. So then they're back in the stream. They're back in the list about where they were. Right. So that's it's 27 months of time that they have a right to recall back in the district. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, did I understand right? Did you want us tonight to eliminate anything on here that we didn't have the stomach for? Did I hear right? And we haven't really done that, that's why I asked.
Well, I didn't say it that way, but I will. But I did need some direction so we can move ahead on looking at these. If there was anything that we were absolutely didn't want us to research at all, or if there were things that you thought were completely missed, that we would put it on this list. And other than that, and again, a reminder: this is the list you want us to research. We'll bring back some concepts then on that Wednesday and say, here's kind of what we've learned about these things to go forward again. So that's, I guess I'm looking for direction on that, so I know that, I have to direct this small but mighty team here to my left and one to my right about what we're going to be doing, so.
So, good question, Phil, and I think that probably leads to our action item. I think we have this document, and what Joe's asking us for is to approve this document or approve an amended or edited document. And so I think this is the time where if we want to propose a change, that we would do so. And if we don't have changes, then we would proceed to vote to approve.
I'll go. I have no problems with the list as it is. I feel like it's well encompassing.
And I think we captured some of the commentary around some of the bullet points too, the nuance, other than just some further investigations we'd like Joe and the staff to do within these bullet points. Again, not agreeing to them, but just to investigate the behind the scenes numbers with some of these. So yeah, I'm comfortable with this list.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with it as well.
Yep, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm fine with the list, and see what the numbers show.
So do we need a motion?
Sure.
I move that we ratify the list that we have here in front of us.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we ratify the list that we have in front of us to prioritize budgeting items. Discussion?
Just I guess one real quick. How is it going to look when you come to us on Wednesdays? Are you giving us options, or is it going to be similar to this with just numbers? I guess it really doesn't matter because I'm going to walk into it, but I like to be somewhat prepared.
It's top secret. I actually don't know yet.
Okay.
It's one of the areas that we want to make sure is that you have enough detail in that thing. So like a cost of benefit or a discussion, or here's what we're thinking, here's what we might save, and this is why it might be good or bad, right? There's a balance in those. So as much of that narrative as we can put together for some of those, and some of them will just be discussion, like here's the number, here's what this means. But I don't have it totally set in my mind yet about exactly how we'll do it.
I think we can be flexible, right, team?
Yeah, we'll bring as much detail. Some may have less detail. Some might be like, this is what this means, and then other ones might have more detail.
All right, let's take the vote then.
Josh?
Yes.
Derek?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Phil?
Yes.
Owen?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
All in favor?
All right, thank you all for that meaningful discussion. So we added at the beginning of the meeting an item that I titled Financial Review Planning Discussion. And basically, I wanted to put it on the table that there are things that I think all of us and our public would like to know in more detail about specific financial actions that got us to a place where we were going to have a negative balance at the end of the year. I think we still need to have that discussion.
Yes.
And at the same time, we can only act through our executive. And our executive is spending all the time trying to get us to a budget so that we can take care of our employees' needs. So I wanted to just open it up for a discussion here for people to be able to talk about the things that they think we need to have in order to have such a discussion, because it's not going to happen anytime in the next, I don't know, month until we get the budget taken care of. I don't see that we have any time our staff doesn't have any time to
No.
prepare for that kind of discussion. But what we can do, like tonight, I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but like, what are some things that we want to focus on when we have that discussion?
Yeah.
And how can we direct staff to help us make sense of those things?
Right. I've been thinking about it a lot. Like, how did we get here? In my opinion, we got here because we'd let the ending fund balance just continue to creep down, and we just kind of all went like, well, I guess. There needs to be a mechanism. If it falls below policy, there needs to be some board action, which causes everyone to think about it. You know, so instead of just going like, well, I guess, which is essentially what we all did, and it kept creeping down at a very steady rate, and then all of a sudden we hit this cliff. And I don't know how you do that, but there just needs to be some sort of mechanism in there, a trigger. You know, we need to have a policy that with some teeth in it regarding our ending fund balance. It's a policy, but it's been treated like a suggestion. And we need to remedy that. And whenever we take board action, it causes us all to think about it and put our names on it, this action, and what it. Anyway, I think maybe that's my thought.
Well, basically, there was the policy, and then it didn't, as the board, didn't get followed, because every time a budget was made, it didn't have that reserve that policy said it should have had. And to what you're talking about, Tom, what should have been happening, and maybe it did, and I just wasn't privy to those meetings, but that should have at least taken a board action to suspend that policy for that fiscal year.
Yes.
Instead of just ignoring it. And it looks like it was just ignored. And like you said, just, that's the way it is. And so we really do have a policy. And then to your point about getting it to us as a board, talking about it and our attention and realizing where things are going, should have at least gone through the process of suspending that policy for that fiscal year, and then that would have created board discussion.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Well, and had we followed the policy, I think it would have probably involved starting potentially 4 years ago, with hiring freezes, maybe even reduction in forces at that time. I mean, that's what it looks to me like it would have taken to create a ramp instead of a cliff.
I think we also need to see a real clear and concise list, not only on our expenditures, but also on the revenue side, as to how we arrived here in this situation. And, as we went through over the last few months, when originally the number was about 800,000, and then shortly thereafter, because of some I'll just say errors on the revenue side, it's clear it was made by our outside auditors, that snowballed into a massive number. So I think, number one, we need to have a clear and itemized list as to the expenditures and in the revenue side of how we got here. Because as I dig into it more, it's really difficult, because I'm concerned that, we weren't, I'm concerned about the accuracy of the data we were receiving. And when you have, departures of staff who are helping oversee that, and it goes from 800 and then it goes to a triple that amount because of some revenue-sided errors, I just need to know how that happened. And it's really hard to stomach that, because those revenue side, that's a very specialized spot that, again, we had 2 independent auditors that came and took weeks to dig into that, to find those errors. And again, it makes me question the accuracy of the information we provided. So, yeah, I think really an itemized way, finding on both sides as to how we got into this position.
I've got a couple thoughts. I think there's a slide that Jackie presented that is just sticks out in my mind, and I think it was the slide where it was like 2019 or 2020 where staff and student enrollment were in line, and then from there on there's this gap. And I think there's that influx of COVID money. I think she spoke to districts across the state having that same kind of gap that started, and that's probably when we should have started looking and putting mechanisms like, hey, this is not going to last forever. And I think those were small, like that was smoke. And then the next smoke was, okay, the ending fund balance is trending down. It's another like smoke signal, and now our house is on fire. And so I think if we would have paid more attention, and like Phil talked about, holding ourselves accountable to that board policy, as soon as we said, hey, we're below what it says by policy, that should have been like, stop, why are we below policy? Some other things that I think contributed to is we weren't getting the financial updates on a monthly basis. Like, we have to go back to getting those on a monthly basis and really drilling down. And if we see something saying, okay, there's smoke here, let's make sure like the house doesn't catch back on fire. And so I think it wasn't just one instant, it was like this collection of lack of focusing on information and maybe some inaccurate data, but I think there were signals there that probably really should give us substantial moments of pause and saying, hang on a second, let's figure out why this is happening and make changes now. And I think it just got pushed further and further down to the road tour in the situation we are now. And so, yeah, I think going back and looking at some of the programs that were implemented, some of the costs that were associated, I think those are all factors, but I think there were some signals that just got missed.
Yeah, and I wanted to respond to a lot of things here. So the first one is the reserves, like every time the budget committee got this is our projected ending fund balance and it's going to be lower this year. The reasoning was generally around collective bargaining agreement. And that was pretty much all of the reasoning that we received. Based on the audit that Jackie did, it seems like there's more there than just that. And so that is something that interests me. Also, the idea of, we did hear in November verbally that there was a revenue miscalculation, a pretty big one, and that also at the same time we were going to be saving money through attrition. We didn't know that those two things didn't match up in terms of dollars, right? Like that we weren't not filling positions enough to make up that amount. And so that is a piece that I'm curious about. But then I also just want to underscore both what Phil and Owen talked about, that it seems like we were over positioning for the amount of students that we have for quite a while. And we needed to make corrections quite a while ago, and that's why this is so hurtful now. I'd like to see, there's other things too that I think that we may be able to have discussions with staff about, but we don't know what we don't know at this
Yeah.
point.
And I guess like it's just now in a, we're formulating a vision of what we'd like to see, and I'd like to see some more mechanisms. I know Dr. Joe's, advising us to get a financial committee going, and with a low budget reserve fund, have that committee meet every month. But then as it gets healthier, maybe you need to meet 3 times a year, and then once a year, something like that. We don't need to do it when things are healthy. We don't have to, but as if that would be a discussion that we would have around, this triggering event, the ending fund balance is too low. We need to have board action, and we can talk about things and set ideas. So that's just where that's just the idea that's in my head. How that works out practically, well, I don't know. Because the thing is, the ending fund balance, the reserve fund goes up and down all year long. It's how it ends. And so, anyway.
Well, that's where the monthly business of, I've talked about it before, where you have percentages, and on both revenue and the expenditure side, and you have a percentage of your 37% through the year. How does your revenue, how does your expenditures align with that? And there's going to be reasons for them to be off, but that, looking at it, then that triggers a conversation around that, where Kim or superintendent, whoever, is going to tell us, well, this gets paid up front. This, and so 90% of the money in this area comes out in October. That's why it's in the red, or 80% spent already, something like that. But at least it creates a discussion then, as far as why it's there. And if the discussion rings true, then all's good. But it's talked about instead of, and I'm going to argue the point about, just because things look healthy, you don't have this finance overlook. You have it all the time. And that's, complacency is how we got where we are. And we don't want complacency.
I agree with Phil that part of the vision that I think Joe is proposing for this finance committee is also education, right? And so continuously educating the board members that are on it about, well, what's this and why is it this? And then, every year that can change, and a different board member can get on and get educated on it. To me, it makes a lot of sense to continue exploring that idea.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know, Phil, if I totally agree that complacency is what got us here. I went back and watched a number of past board meetings, and the November 27 board meeting was actually a pretty interesting one, because I think it was representative of a lot of the reports that we got, which was a message that was concerning regarding our ending fund balances, but given with explanations and questions, and then also coupled with an optimistic vision going forward and a plan going forward that obviously did not turn out to be correct, unfortunately. But I'm not sure, and I've asked myself a lot, and I think other board members have as well, is what kind of questions would have been asked or could have been asked differently to root out and foresee, where we would be 6 months later, or 3 months later, as a matter of fact. So obviously there can be more vigilance that can happen, but I think it's, in large part, we do rely on the information that we're given, yeah, I think some of the ideas that have been given here tonight will help us to, potentially be not only better ourselves, but maybe also help our, staff as they're looking at and preparing to give us the information. There's value in that as well. So.
Josh, I don't think you've had a chance.
I'm thinking a lot.
Okay.
What to say, what not to say. There's a unique skill I'm learning. How do we get here? Oof. I'll just try to keep it brief. Because I think it's actually a long story for Silverton for many years. How we've kind of got to the position we're in with superintendents retiring and interims and COVID and a bunch of stuff. But I mean, I guess I have a lot of frustration, like everybody. There was a culture of like, don't challenge, don't ask questions. I remember being in the board meeting, like our reserves were like 2.5 or 1.5. I'm like, our policy says 10. I mean, I pulled it up. I'm like, how is this okay? And nobody said anything. Like the admin, like, wait, I don't understand. And anytime you'd ask questions like that, I feel like there's like you would either get shut down or you're getting into the weeds, you're getting into operations, you're stepping outside of your lane, leave it to us. And if I look back at like a lot of it, watching board meetings for years, I just kind of felt like that's kind of probably the culture of the district of how it works, whether you're a principal, a teacher, or anything, a board member. Like, it was my experience that I didn't want to feel like a pain in the butt, and for fear of creating conflict, just as much fear as I have right now of creating more conflict at the district, and trying to be so careful with what I say, because I want to see us unified. And so this is heartbreaking. It's very hard to know what to say. I have a lot in my head of what I think happened. I don't want to suppose or be subjective.
Well,
I'd
and
really
I
like
think
to get
that-
down, yeah.
I think that's the point here,
Yeah.
is that what is the information that we need to know in order to be able to pinpoint these are mistakes? Like Owen said, you know, like I wish at that meeting that I would have said, hey, is that, are those savings that we're gonna take in through attrition gonna equal that $800,000 that we missed the mark in revenue? I mean, I assumed that they were, but that was not the case. So, or at least, I don't know that. It appears to be that was not the case. So those are the kinds of, the questions that I have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess I'll look back and think, because over the years, the ending fund balance always trended very slowly down or very slowly up. And so it was always under control. You knew that it was going to trend down or trend up, and always followed that. So as I looked at it, I'm going like, this can't last very much longer. We got a few more years of this rate, and then we need to get on this and get it back up. I've never seen a cliff like that.
Well,
And so that's just, it was never in my realm of possibilities that it would ever run into a cliff. So you just assume that the information that they had this under control, okay, they got it under control, but we got to turn this around next year. And then, well,
that was the plan. We
then
were
here comes
told.
the cliff. Then here comes, but I've never seen a cliff or heard of one. It was all the habitual. The information was always accurate, and it was always this steady decline. Or it was never this. It was just very steady and a controlled decline or a controlled increase, not a
But at the budget committee.
complacency. You could even you can call that complacency. Or just you're used to turn the water faucet on. It always comes out. It was never a question. And then it just no, not this time.
But the budget committee process, that was what we were presented with, is the idea that 2024, 2025, we would be building our ending fund balance back up.
Yes, yes.
And now we're
The big cliff was it.
cutting
Yep.
8.8
Yep.
million. So any other ideas about, and this is something that we can just keep a record of and maybe talk to staff about when they're ready, because they are not ready
Nope.
to have this conversation. But we need to have it so that we can learn and so that our public can also hear the things and hold us accountable. So I think that is an important thing. I can't predict when it's going to happen.
One more thought I had here too is, one thing too that we can do is when there's large amount expenditures, not a paperclip thing or anything like that, but when there's large, is flat out asking where is this money coming from? The expense, the extra expense on consultants in the bond is a perfect example. There was not that much money that was spent in that column. And if simply been asked, where's this coming from? Is there that money there? And there wasn't. And so that meant it came from somewhere else and got slid out of somewhere else. So just those sort of things. And that's where I get with the complacency. We like to think the best, but by the same token, that's our watchdog role. And that's not micromanaging, that is in our lane. And I think too often, some things that were in our lane, we're led to believe weren't. And so we didn't pursue them.
Well, and with that specific question, I know Josh actually asked that specific question, I believe. And he got an answer that I think, in retrospect, was less than, I don't think it was dishonest, but it was less than fully truthful.
Yeah.
Put it that way, unfortunately. I think one thing that we can do that's coming up right away is that, in my opinion, as we look to an interim superintendent and then to a future permanent superintendent, is to really consider the importance of them having a history of strong fiscal responsibility.
Hmm.
I have a quick question since we're on this, and it's more for Kim. I'm assuming that they've already done a majority, like 80–90% of the work of trying to get the right numbers. I'm sure they were probably already looking back and like, oh, what were they doing here, kind of stuff. Kim, I'm assuming that some of this work, if we were to ask you for a report and at some point of like what happened, that you guys probably have more of an idea, but not come 100% picture to report with, correct? Like, my fear is that if we're gonna push it back, things will get lost in translation.
Absolutely, no records are lost, actually. Records are
Yeah.
retained, very detailed. So, you know, we do have all of the information about where every dime has, you know, come, gone. It's identifying the how. Yeah, that is different. As you've talked about, there are assumptions that are made and there are assumptions that are missed. There are expenses that are planned for, there are expenses that are unforeseen. So absolutely, all of the data is 100% intact. It's a matter of resources, as in time. For our district to have the lights on July 1, we have to have a budget to the state of Oregon by June 30th, and you have to work backward from June 30th. There are deadlines that the state imposes, and based on the timelines of all those different deadlines, we have to work backward. So we right now are focused on being able to operate day by day moving forward. No historical information will be lost or unavailable when we have that time. So
I want to be very clear. I was not assuming you guys would like move things. I was simply duplicating the work you've already done because it was in the back of your head, like where that's
No,
at.
yeah.
That's
There's a
what I was
difference.
saying, like, because I know you guys have been doing a lot of this work trying to get the numbers right. The questions, you know, as a board member, is like, well, why weren't they right the first time? So
Right, there's
but I'm
a-
sure you guys have that answer somewhat now. And so like, there'll probably be a time for that when we have to get into it a little more. That was my point. There was no accusations.
That's okay. Having the numbers accurate are one thing, but having the analysis and the why behind them is something totally different. And I think, I do think it's important for you at some point to do some of that analysis and get those things done. I will tell you that I can't drive this group any harder right now because they're putting in, we're on hour 13 or 14 for most of these folks, and they'll keep going back tomorrow. So furlough tomorrow, and some of them may or may not be working. So I think it's important to recognize that, yes, we have all the records. Yes, we're trying to figure out what the actual dollars are. That's all in the finance system, so you can run a report. The work that Jackie and Linda both did for us, you know, they worked for 6 days straight and came up with something, and they're big experts to just tell us where we were. My biggest fear was, I don't know how big the hole is. I need to know that first so I can figure out what to do next. And so we, in a short amount of time, We have to take care of our employees, let them know where they are or where they're not. We have to get those things right, and it is important for you to do a look back and get those things. We can't do that right now, so I'm just gonna be honest with you. We have to get this part of the process done, because we have to take care of our people, and then we'll get to that next part. It won't be that long in the rearview mirror. We can go back and go, here's all the things that were incorrect, here are all these other things that happened. You know, knowing what our numbers are so we can land on, here's the target we're hitting, that's what we have to do right now. We have to get that, and, you know, and some of this is, again, back to the guessing, right? We have to say, we think it's about this many people coming. We think we have about this many kindergartners. We know we're taking an enrollment loss next year because we'll probably have fewer kindergartners than we do have graduating seniors. You know, there's that differential, and so there's lots of that kind of stuff we're working on to make sure that we hit the right number, because we don't want to have to do something later in the year. Oh, by the way, we're not going to make it because we didn't cut enough or we spent too much over here. So there's a lot of that, but and Kim is exceptionally diligent and would probably spend the next 70,000 hours trying to get that for us, but she's getting the numbers correct. But the analysis does take a long time, and that's something that we can look into in a few weeks, but we got to get this other part done first.
And I just wanted to underscore that we do, I think all of us, I probably speak for all of us, that we sympathize with the anxiety that doesn't just affect the people who are worried about RIF, but it affects everybody. And we are willing to meet as often as we need to. Also realizing that not everybody's job or situations allows them to. I know Josh had to leave a meeting early. I had to leave a meeting early because I was working. Derek's a police officer. He might get called in on something. So we've all committed that we will be available, and knowing that there has got to be a little bit of flexibility there for us too. So. Thank you for all the work.
Oh, you're welcome. And
Full
we've gotten your
staff.
calendar, so we'll book it up solidly for you. Yeah.
All right, anything else before we adjourn? All right, thanks, Phil and Joy, and we'll see you in person next time. Meeting adjourned.